Today we are talking to Shane Hastie, Director of Community Development at IC Agile and co-author of #No Projects, a culture of continuous value. So welcome, Shane.
Thank you, David. It's great to be here.
Good. So we're going to put you through your paces today with a bit of a Q&A on your book and to find out the contents of it and your thoughts around it. So first of all, I'd like to say, well, I should hold up the book. Here it is. I like how to start with. It gives a bit of a survey on the history of project management, from bar charts and Gantt charts and critical path schedules, as well as more, and starts off by quoting some pretty scary figures about success or lack of success on traditional projects. So go on, give us some scary details.
Oh, well, depending on what study you look to, traditional sequential project management in knowledge worker environments is successful between 6% of the time and 32% of the time.
That doesn't sound too bad, right? I mean, there's some failure, but it's not awful.
Yeah, 1 in 3 projects is successful.
Okay.
We've delivered the value that our customers want within an acceptable variation of time and money, and we have met the features. So one of the Standish Group surveys looking at waterfall projects said large projects, 94% chance of not being successful, 6% successful. Then about the best that we've seen is in the 32 to 34%. Now, I will say there are domains where that predictive project management style makes sense and is much, much more successful. If you're doing civil engineering construction where you are repeating the same house build over and over again, the little boxes on the hillside, you're going to be accurate and you can plan it down to probably a 5% or 10% variance and really close. You can also roboticize that. And that's the other thing that's happening, is those predictable elements of work are being automated and roboticized. And that makes perfect sense, because when you can get those efficiencies, use the efficiencies. The challenge, of course, is most of the value in today's economy is not in those predictable sequential things. It's in knowledge work.
In the book, you talk about some pretty flawed thinking in terms of knowledge work.
Yeah. The first of those is that you simply can predict knowledge work, that you can take the ideas of predictive project management and apply it to what is actually a learning environment. There's almost all knowledge work involves learning new things and responding to the new things that you've learned in new ways. Whereas the science that project management in particular drew from, the predictive sequential civil engineering science. Now, let's be real. Civil engineers have had around about 10,000 years of experience doing this stuff. If you're talking about bricklaying, building a wall, which is one of the fundamentals of civil engineering, you can be pretty accurate in terms of your estimation activity and your prediction activity. There's some work to be done in advance, where we need to figure out how wide, how deep, and how tall the wall is going to be. We need to know what the load-bearing capacity is that we want on this wall. What's the wall going to be for? And then we've got formulas. And there are highly skilled people called quantity surveyors who work this stuff out. And they've got books of formulas and they've got history. And they can tell you that for a wall of that wide and that deep and that high, using this particular type of brick, we will need so many bricks. Now, that's a simple mathematical formula. Now, this is the simplest aspect, but it extrapolates. So the volumetric calculation, the volume of the wall divided by the volume of the bricks, and what's our history of waste in bricklaying? So allow for, I don't know, 3.5% extra because we're going to waste about 3.5% of the bricks. Now, how do we know that? Well, we've measured it for 10,000 years and it's averaging out at about 3.5% of the bricks are wasted. How much mortar do we need? Well, how much mortar goes around a single brick? How many bricks do we need? All right, multiply that out. What is the load-bearing capacity? Look up the tables. Oh, so we will need this much of this type of steel going through that. All right, so now I know how many bricks, how much mortar, how many steel rods to put into the wall. My only unknown is how long does it take to lay a brick? So now I need to do some reasonable guesstimation. And I've got, again, 10,000 years of history of people who lay one brick upon another and who become highly skilled and professional at it. And highly skilled professionals in any field with deliberate practice and good bricklayers, they have a rate of work. And the interesting thing is that the velocity, that rate of work between two bricklayers, is going to be for the two professionals, not the amateur and the professional, but the two professionals with round about the same experience. That rate of work is going to be within about a 5% standard deviation. So what one bricklayer takes, if one bricklayer does 100 bricks in a certain time period, the other bricklayer will be between 95 and 105. So now I can actually work out in advance the cost and the time. My only variable I have no control over is the weather. But I do have some weather patterns that I can look to. So if I'm building walls, I can be very, very predictable, and it makes sense. The other thing about that is I can trade money for time. If it takes one bricklayer a month to build the walls that I need, I can cut that time in half by putting two bricklayers on it. I'm getting a straight line improvement. If I want to cut that time in half again, I put four bricklayers on it. So my unit cost per brick laid is going to be the same, but the number of bricks that I'm laying in a time period is going to increase, hence my cost graph goes up, but it will come to the same end point, taking into account some variance for overtime and so forth. And I can continue adding labor, adding bricklayers to it until such time as they're so close together their elbows bump against each other. Up until that time, adding extra capacity decreases the time in a straight line improvement curve. And if you want to see this in action, there is a YouTube video of building a house in under 3 hours. Search for world record house building. 2,000 people working simultaneously built a timber frame, I think it was 3-bedroom house, in 2 hours and 51 minutes.
Wow.
That's the classic. That's the extreme example of trading labor capacity for money. Now, this was done as a world record and a charity thing. Interestingly, in the video that talks about it, they talk about the 2.5 years spent planning it. Because that's where the learning was happening. And if we look at most civil engineering, most construction, most of these predictable type work, there is a planning and investigation component. The analysis and design work that goes on. And in civil engineering, that's between 5 and 10%. of the investment. And I don't know, have you ever worked with an architect to have your house built?
No.
But if you go to an architect and you ask them for a fixed time, fixed cost, fixed scope quote for doing the architecture for your property, they will tell you to go and take a flying leap at yourself. Because what they're doing is creative work, and there's a lot of learning. They need to understand what is the purpose of the property, of the building. What is they need to know sight lines and sunshine and all of that sort of stuff. So there's a lot of investigation, and then they've got to understand what your needs are. And that analysis stuff that ends up in a design is a fundamentally learning activity, and then we build from that design. In the civil engineering world, the build is 90%. And that analysis and learning and design is 10%. And there is a lot of variance. There's a huge amount of unknowns in that space. But now we go to, let's take software development as a case of knowledge work. But we could be talking about marketing, we could be talking about drawing up legal contracts, almost any of these creative activities. So if I take software development, because that's my personal background, I was a programmer. I'm able to admit I'm no longer the world's best programmer, but every programmer was once upon a time for at least a little while. And I've come up through that space. So what is the programming equivalent of laying a brick?
Hitting the keyboard and writing some code.
So does the programmer have any choice about which keys they're hitting and what code they're writing?
They do.
Does the bricklayer?
Only apart, I mean, every brick looks the same, right?
And I want to be able to swap one bricklayer for another and not see the difference. I'm going to say that the equivalent of laying bricks in the software realm is hit the compile button. That's the only point where there's a mechanistic transfer. So in the civil engineering world, that build component is 90% of the cost and the effort. And the creativity stuff is 10%. In the knowledge worker realm of programming, there is another activity that is kind of at that level of bricklaying. So the one is hitting the compile button where a mechanistic transfer takes place. The other one is hitting the run button on an automated test suite. Those two activities are the only points where there's no creativity involved. Now, if we take the compile, the cost of that compiler is amortized over tens of thousands of compilations. So your unit cost per compilation is going to be fractions of fractions of fractions of a penny, or a cent, or a whatever unit you want to use. All of the cost is in the other stuff. And that other stuff is fundamentally not predictable. And that's where we fall down. That's where trying to apply the sequential predictive project management approaches to any form of knowledge work fall apart. That's why the probabilities are low of success, between 6 and 32% success rates. I'm going to say that the vast majority of projects, and stats do back this up, and there are lies, there are damn lies, and there are statistics, to badly quote somebody. But the stats, the research is out there that shows that most of these knowledge worker initiatives, we get to an end point, we deliver something. And very, very often we then redefine our definition of success to be, thank God we got something out the door. As opposed to, is it genuinely delivering value? Are we achieving the business outcomes that were the intent behind this thing? Now, in software development, we figured this out in the 80s and 90s, and it was codified in 2001 with the Agile Manifesto, and we've built on that from there. What this is exploring, and Evans and my thinking was, how does this apply beyond software? How can we start to leverage these ideas into other areas of the organization and move beyond that project thinking? Because there's a whole lot of flaws embedded in the project model, and most of it comes down to the uncertainty that we're dealing with and the pretense of certainty that comes from that project thinking.
You just touched there about the outcomes. There's a whole chapter on the output-outcome debate as well, which is fascinating. I was very happy to see that in there. There's a lot of talk about output still. People are still focused on getting the thing delivered. So the Agile Manifesto, just a quick deviation, the Agile Manifesto does focus a lot on delivery, which you could argue is about the focus on output rather than outcome. And I noticed right at the back of the book, you've actually kind of done a slight amendment to the Agile Manifesto, which you've got, instead of working software, you've got value creation, which I think can be very helpful to a lot of people because it's not working software they're doing. As you said, it might be writing a legal document or whatever else. And so value creation and focusing on the outcome rather than the output, I think is a good point. And I encourage people to read that chapter to go into that. So could you give me a short, snappy summary of what No Projects is? Because there's lots of things it covers.
We did come up with a short, snappy phrase. No Projects is the alignment of activities to outcomes, measured by value, constrained by guiding principles, and supported by continuous delivery technologies. So in the software world, that is DevOps and so forth. But in the marketing world, it's how can we, what is the equivalent of that continuous delivery, iterative, frequent releases and so forth, as opposed to the big bang thinking that is embodied in that project culture.
And there's one at the end which talks about and relates very much to that, about the funding as well, right? So people often struggle with it. I've struggled with this with clients on numerous occasions, and many people, and they do as well, right? How do you get the budget for it? And it's that, you make a comment at the end about it's this warped thinking that actually a definite end is a better thing.
Yeah, and all right, let's tackle where we are right now in the world. We're coming to, this is October 2020. We have been through the last 10 months of COVID-19. Around about this time last year, in many, many organizations around the world, finance departments were sitting down and coming up with the 2020 budget. The projects that we're going to be funded for 2020, the work we're going to do, the money we're going to spend. How many of those budgets applied on the 1st of March, 2020?
Scarier. How many of them actually proceeded, though, Shane, regardless of the change, right?
Yeah.
No. we probably don't want to see those stats, do we? But yeah, I mean, very few of them did apply, but I suspect many of them still proceeded. Yeah.
Sadly, I suspect that is the case. And here we drew heavily from the work of Beyond Budgeting. This has been around since the 1990s. This is not new. But this concept of iterative incremental funding. Fund the experiment to learn, then fund from that experiment the next piece and the next piece. Are we Is the money that we are spending delivering value? When does that value stop? Then please stop funding it.
I'm going to stick my neck out. I think this is the fundamental benefit of using an agile approach, using an iterative and incremental delivery. When people say, you know, how do we sell agile? Well, we're not here about selling agile, right?
Yeah.
But why would you ever want to spend money that doesn't make sense spending money? Like, do a bit of work and find out if it's still worth investing your hard-earned money and your valuable money as a business in you're doing, or whether you should spend something else.
Yeah. But yeah, there is, and this goes back to W. Edwards Deming. You know, there is nothing worse than doing efficiently that which should not be done at all.
So look, Shane, I'm aware that we are cracking on. I had a load of things I wanted to talk to you about, so I'm going to throw some out there, and let's try and only answer one of them, and then everyone's going to have to buy the book and read the others. So the ones on the cards are a statement you said you're not in the business to make money. There's Dude's Law, degradation of value, one that's really close to my heart, but why hypotheses are important, because that's my next book. The Iron Triangle Rewrite, and then adaptive portfolios, another drum I've been banging for you. So all of those are so important, but if you had to pick one to respond to, which one would you go for?
I'm gonna go with Dude's Law, just because Dave Hussman was such an amazing guy. And he's the one who came up with Dude's Law. And before he passed away, he actually gave us permission to include it and use it. And there's that beautiful caricature of David in there. He was such, just a wonderful, generous man who made a huge impact with everything that he did for the community at large. So Dude's Law is really simple. Value is why divided by how. For any piece of work, for anything that you are doing, there's a why. There is a business benefit, there's a societal benefit, there's an individual benefit, there's an outcome. And then there is a how of doing that, and that's going to have a cost. Now, sometimes the units for the why are going to be slightly different to the units for the how. So you may need to do a little bit of mental gymnastics. So investing in low carbon technologies. Well, the why? I want to leave a better world for my grandchildren. Can I put a direct monetary value to that? No. But I can certainly know when it's not being achieved. The how, now there's a cost to carbon sequestration, or to buying an electric vehicle, or to adopt, or to installing solar panels, or whatever. But there's a why that is the primary driver there. Sometimes the how is too much for the why. And that means I have to rethink it, and value is possibly not going to be viable to achieve.
What use is Dude's Law to people in the everyday?
Every piece of work that we're doing, every initiative we're thinking about, every task that we're taking on has a value. The why over the how. And if we think of the organizations today that are shifting their thinking towards customer centricity and mission driven and so forth, and there's the why. Are we achieving that why with this how? If not, is there a better how I could use?
And they don't need to plug in numbers, right, and figures on this. The general concept is the less work you're doing something and the more value you're getting from it, then the better the equation, right?
Yeah.
Some of it. Yeah, and especially if you can get some value and do no work. I think that was your sweet spot. You're saying that's even better, right?
Yeah, that's the infinite.
Yeah. Good. So I'm going to wrap this up now, because I don't want to cover the whole book, otherwise no one's going to buy it. Thank you very much. Is there any one last nugget you want to leave us with?
I'll go back to Dude's Law. For everything you do, think about the value that you're generating for society as a whole, for your organization, for your customers, for your organization, for yourself, and have a clear understanding of the why and the how.
If you want confidence in applying the fundamentals of Agile, then head to scrumandkanban.co.uk. Sign up to our mailing list to get free downloads, such as our free 6-step guide on how to implement Agile successfully, as well as details of our workshop, certified training, blog posts, and other goodies. If you like this, then give us a thumbs up and press subscribe so you don't miss future episodes, and let us know what you would like us to cover in future episodes by leaving a comment. Thanks for watching. See you next time.